In this next little material section, I'm going to go over some techniques for glass. This is going to be a shorter section because honestly glass is a little bit easier, which is cool. So V-Ray makes glass very simple. So I can just start off by going to black diffuse, pure white clean reflection. And then if I scroll down to my refraction settings, I can just set this to white and all of a sudden we will have a nice glass shader. Couple quick settings that I do want to mention here. So first we do have a refraction IOR. If you're doing normal window glass, that's right around 1.45, 1.4, somewhere around there. And if you want to, you'll notice if you look at the ground here, this is actually still casting a dark shadow. So V-Ray by default is not going to pass the transparency from the glass down onto the ground. So you do need to turn on this Affect Shadows checkbox. And you can see as that updates, this got much brighter under here. And if we go over to our render settings, I do want to say I do have refractive caustics turned on in the GI settings. And what that means is that the GI rays are going to travel through transparent surfaces like we have here and scatter back down onto the ground. That is a bit of a render hit. So, if you're needing to trim down your render times, that's one of the first things that I'll experiment with turning off to see how it looks. Cool. So this is, our shader ball is looking pretty nice and glass-like, which is cool. The refraction color can always be adjusted, and that will just simply tint the color of the refraction and also tint the shadow as long as you have Affect Shadows turned on. Depending how you're going to be compositing this, you do also have some options to how this transparency is going to travel through your color channels. So you can say color only, meaning your alpha will be solid and you'll comp the refraction pass along with it. Color plus alpha if you want a transparent alpha. That does make compositing a little trickier, but it can be very helpful if you are doing something like compositing on a live action plate. Lastly, we have the all channel section, which will propagate all of your render elements through the glass, meaning you actually don't even need your refraction render element anymore. You can just simply dial the settings in their respective channels. So I'm going to turn that on real quick. We'll let that refresh. So what I mean by that is now if I go to my GI pass, I actually see my GI and the result of my GI through this glass. Same thing with my lighting, reflection, etc. By contrast, if I set this back to color only, all of the result of the refraction is going to be only happening inside of the refraction pass, which looks like that. So depending how you want to composite it, it really is up to you. The way I like to think about this stuff is a lot of times in full CG environments, I do kind of prefer to have this set to color only, because in this kind of situation that we're looking at here, it is kind of nice to just go in and simply have one place for your refraction to be graded. That being said, if you're dealing with render elements, like having a RGB matte of some kind, so let's stop our IPR and let's go ahead and generate one V-Ray multi-matte. And I'm just going to turn on material ID and we'll just set the red channel to 1. And we'll just go ahead on this shader here, our shader ball logo, and I'm just going to turn on material ID and set that material ID to 1 so that it matches. So let's redo our IPR real quick. Cool, so if I go to my multi-matte right now, you can see I'm only getting an alpha of the result of where that shader ball is right now. If I needed to color correct that, and let's say my glass was actually just clear. So in our hypothetical situation here, let's say I want to change this gray to be brighter. And by doing that, I want to, adjust my lighting pass and brighten it up. I would have to find a way to separate that out inside of my refraction pass, which could be really challenging. And this is really where our all channels section comes in. By setting all channels, if I go to my multi-matte now, you can see I'm actually getting the result of the refraction of that alpha, which is really awesome. Some words of warning. Let me go ahead and add a material ID to my glass here. I will set that to 2. I'm going to bounce back over to my multi-matte and set my green to 2. We'll wait for this to update. I might have to restart my IPR for this, I'm not sure. It looks like I do need to. So let me go ahead and kick that back on. There we go. So you'll notice that the green channel has values that are actually stacked up. So I'm not actually getting a proper alpha of this green matte. So this is kind of a, has some pros and cons that you will have to weigh in your own situations. You will not be able to get a perfect green alpha in the all channels section. So something you could do is have all channels set on your beauty layer, since that's where all of this stuff is happening. And then in the situation where you did need that multi-matte to be rendered, you could have a separate utility pass. And let's say, up in here, this is my hypothetical utility pass. I could create a layer override and have that be set to color only. That would give me a solid alpha if I need it in my alpha channel rather than transparent, which I have now. And on top of it, that would give me a solid green in my multi-matte that I'm using. So definitely a lot of different things to consider when you're setting that flag. So I'm just going to flip it back to color only because that's all I need right now. And I'm actually going to restart my IPR. And I do want to show dispersion. The dispersion is a really beautiful effect. And what it does is it will create a chromatic aberration effect on the refraction inside of your shader. And so you can see in areas like down in here, once it kind of refreshes that little box I just drew, you notice the render time definitely took a dive here. But even right now with a dispersion aberration value of 50, it's fairly subtle, but it's in there. And so the way this works is as you lower this down, it will increase the spread of the aberration. So if I lower this to 5, the progressive render might be a little noisy. It might look a little rainbowy at first, but it will kind of clean up here. And you'll start getting that effect that you see in diamonds or really fancy crystals or something like that. And so let's do a full render of this so we can really see it in all of its glory here. I'm just going to do a full render. There you go, really beautiful. Totally dig it. That took about a minute to render, so definitely a little bit longer than if you didn't have it turned on, but it's definitely has its place and can be very useful in certain situations. So again, things like diamonds or fancy glass or anything. If you're doing some type of hand-blown glass asset, or maybe like fancy armor or fancy liquid, spell kind of effect, you can turn that on and just see what you get. So cool. I'm actually going to leave it off for right now. And I'm actually going to show how easy it is to layer these together. So I'm going to go ahead and graph this shader. And I'm going to create a V-Ray blend material. And I'm going to delete that shading group. And I'm going to connect our shading group into the one that I have assigned already. So there we go. And this glass is actually going to be the base material here. And I'm just going to get another V-Ray material. And I'm just going to keep this gray, just chalky, maybe a little bit of roughness, a little bit of specular, very, very soft, rough specular. This shader is actually going to be my smudge material, the kind of white film that's left, from fingerprints or dirt, the really subtle texture that you can see over top of glass. So this is, would from a technical standpoint, would be very difficult to do if you were painting maps, because I would need to paint potentially a Fresnel map, a specular map, glossiness, and refraction, all to hold this out properly. Or we can just simply have one black and white map holding the two shaders out. And so that's what I'm going to set up here. And so you can see, again, render time definitely slowed down. I am rendering two shaders at the moment because I have them kind of 50% one to the other. So if I pull this all the way down to black, it'll snap back to the glass. If my IPR wants to update here. I think I broke it. Won't get that. Oh, there we go. So restarted. And let's go ahead and bring in our file texture. So I do have some in the glass section here. I have a smudges texture. And so this smudges texture, I'm just going to drag in right into my blend amount, and we'll see how it looks. And since it's a little slow, just so I can really see exactly where it is, I'm actually going to make this shader red to make sure I know exactly where it's at. And then I'll be able to dial it in. It's a very subtle effect, but it's a very complex effect. And so you do want to make sure you know where it is prior to just dropping it in. So it's interesting. So it's going over quite a bit of the shader, which is probably what's leading to my render time going so far or so long. So what I can do here is actually, I can insert a remap. I'm sure you're starting to notice a theme here with the way I do my shader building. It's a lot of remapping. And I can bring that black forward a little bit to just try and clamp it down so that some of those areas that may have a very small amount of black in them, or sorry, a small amount of gray in them, I want to kind of ease off of that so that it's really only happening in the smudges. You can see now here, if I drag my little render region, you'll see I only am getting those smudges across the area of that glass right there. And that's what I'm looking for. So that's actually feeling very cool. I could also, if I want to, I could bring this down a little bit and clamp that a little further. That will make some of the smudges a little bit brighter. You can see I'm starting to get a little bit more of that detail coming through, but I'm still maintaining some of the changed black point so that I'm not getting a kind of wash of red over the whole thing. So the way the blend shader works is V-Ray is checking where that ray hits, and if there's any hint of two shaders, you are essentially rendering two shaders. So if your entire thing is a blend of two shaders rather than one or the other, it will take longer to render. In this case, I am probably rendering quite a bit of my object has two shaders. In something like the Rusty Metal, where it was really kind of rust or metal with a little outline around the rust where it was rendering both blended together, it's a little easier for V-Ray to deal with that. So anyways, let's get our smudges here. So I'm kind of, this texture was actually kind of supposed to be drips, which I don't really feel right now in this. So I'm actually going to see if I can rotate this. Much better. So what I want to do is make my material desaturated again. So it's just white, maybe a little bit of gray value in there. And I'm just going to do a full render of this and we can see how it looks. Actually, it just looks a little bright in my IPR, so I'm actually going to take that down a little bit more. So maybe around, this has my color management on. So this slider, it does have the sRGB correction. So it'll be hard to see over the gray sphere, but I really just kind of want it to feel kind of chalky. So it can be a little brighter than that gray. And, just a little, so I'm looking right in here. There we go. That's feeling cool. So I'm going to do a full render now, and we'll see how it looks. It's definitely feeling pretty cool, so I'm going to go ahead and let a big one rip. Pretty cool. it really is a subtle thing, but it's a fairly complex effect. You know, I could have some sort of fingerprint on this. And if you imagined if you had a character looking out a window and there was this film of dirt over that window and you could even see that reflected in the shadows and that kind of thing, it's a really powerful effect. And it's not exactly easy to do, but it has a very photographic and real quality to it, which is awesome. And I really attribute that to this shader being built in a way that's very representative of real life. You know, you start out with one material, that's your glass, and you're layering your dusty kind of grunge material over top of it, or smudge rather, and it just lays this, you know, kind of film over top of the shader. Just so you can see, the render time took about 1:46, and so that's pretty heavy for, you know, what it is. So definitely not the most complex effect in the world. You do have to be careful with refractions, but definitely sells it as, you know, just having a little bit of smudges, dirt in there, which is cool. So the last thing I want to show in this glass example, go ahead and save this out. This, by the way, is going to be Chapter 4 Material Types Glass in the working files. I'm actually going to go ahead and let's move the shader over a little bit. I think I also inadvertently deleted my Chrome shader on the ball, so I'm actually going to recreate that real quick. There we go. I have a polygon plane here. And we can delete these other guys. I think those are the cloth objects. This is going to be used to just show how to approach something like a stained glass. So this does have a little bit of thickness to it. There we go. So let's go ahead and assign a V-Ray material. And again, just like before, we'll start with the black diffuse, very sharp reflections. And then I'm going to map a file texture into my refraction color. So here's our stained glass. And very cool. So let's just, even like that, let's see what we got here. So it's definitely working. If I was really going to spend a lot of time with this, I would want to build this out so that it was actually constructed into the different panels. Right now, I just have a photograph, and so the metal bars that are holding all these areas out are actually in the texture, which is not really what I would want. I would want that to be more like a actual model, and so then you would feel the thickness a little bit better. But this is going to work for now. So let's go ahead and let's see this shader here. I am going to go ahead and turn on Affect Shadows, because that's one of the beautiful things of a stained glass window is you'll see the colorful shadow coming behind it. And so right now, I think that these colors are a little dull. So I do want to go in and I'm going to not going to use my remap this time, but I am going to use a little bit of math. I'm going to use a multiply divide. And then I'm going to clamp it in case I crank it up too much. Actually, rather than multiplying, I decided to do a remap HSV instead. So we'll see. Maya's unfortunately has really limited color controls. It has these very archaic nodes. It doesn't just simply have like the equivalent of what we would get inside of a, you know, a nuke color grade node, which is really what it needs, just a simple gain, gamma, that type of thing. So I'm going to bring this stained glass texture in, and let's get that connected into my refraction color. And let's toss a clamp on this. I want to make sure that my max doesn't go above 1 in case I, you know, if I am over cranking the value a little bit, I don't want to go over the value of 1. So the refraction doesn't do anything weird. So now let's just go ahead and pull this. And there we go. So it's just letting a lot more light through. And you can dial this how you need to. So that feels pretty nice. And, you know, you can also really see, I was hoping to get a little bit more in the shadow, but it may just be the nature of this object, these textures. Also, the softness of my light is potentially not helping. But generally speaking, you know, you could get pretty far. You can see how this could start coming together. And so right now, this is also a potentially a little bit funky. Let's put an object behind it. And we'll just tuck that back in Z space a little bit. There we go. And so what I'm getting at is if we have that object up in here somewhere. So the stained glass usually is actually fairly diffused. And so I did want to bring this up because we can go in on the refraction, and we do have a refraction glossiness. And so I can go in and actually diffuse that a bit so that it does, you know, kind of make it that milkier feel so that, you know, we'll see shadows on the other side. We'll see the rough shape, but we won't actually be able to see through it. And that'll really help with that stained glass feeling. So cool. You know, stained glass might also be a little bit bumpy, so I could go in and map that original texture to my bump map and just see what we get. Maybe try a negative value. Not really ideal. Not really ideal. That was a quick experiment that didn't end very well. So a little lower. It's starting to feel a little bit better. So let's actually go in here and maybe we'll bring this value a little closer, a little bit brighter. And I want to see what this looks like in the other lighting conditions. So I'm going to stop my IPR. I want to see what this looks like in my, let's actually delete this layer, in my sun and sky here. So the render came out and I got these really nasty sparkly bits, and it's definitely some sort of artifact from the specular reflection. It looks like it's actually coming directly from the reflection of the sunlight. So I did give this a little bit of softness in the glossiness. And these values are actually reflecting the sun. So they're values of almost, you know, 20, 30, that kind of thing. But pretty cool. You can definitely see that colorful shadow. I'm actually going to tuck it back a little bit here so we can see a little bit more of that. And let's see if that looks a little bit better. And we'll call it quits after that. Looking pretty cool. It looked like it was actually potentially some sort of artifact from the shadow of the other object. You know, you can really see that colorful shadow now. Just to see what it looks like, we could even tuck this guy in front of our other object. Let's scale it up a little bit. And then we will bring our shader ball right back here. And we'll just do something like that. Just try and see what it looks like to get that colorful shadow going across the other glass object. I actually have no idea what this is going to do. It might look terrible, but just for the sake of shader development, we'll take a look and see what it does. So it's still rendering in. I kind of missed those. I'm going to rearrange these a little bit. It definitely handled it pretty good. The softness and the refraction is kind of nice. You can see there's a subtle shadow on the backside here, and we're really getting that beautiful colored shadow falling across right there. You know, the shadows penetrate over here, they intersect, everything's looking pretty cool. So handled it pretty well. And so again, to really sell this, I would need to model these bars and get everything kind of sorted out so that it wasn't just one single block of geo. But for something so simple, it's actually not so bad. So pretty cool. So that's kind of a really quick summary of the glass. The only other thing, and I actually mentioned this last part in my Gnomon, so just so let me get this labeled here. So this is the stained glass. And I will unhide that in the render layer. And I'll just put it on a display layer so that you can hide it and unhide it as you please. Cool. The only other thing about the glass that is worth mentioning on the actual regular refraction here, there is this fog color. And I also, sorry, let's do it on the actual glass shader. I do talk about this in the intro DVD a bit, but it's a really beautiful effect, so I'll just show it off. The way this works is you basically have a fog bias, fog multiplier, and fog color. And this will multiply color through the depth of the refraction, so thicker areas will get more color and thinner areas will get less. This fog bias you can think of as a ramp where 0 is fairly even, and as that number goes higher, the color, the fog will get more spread out. And if you actually go negative, the contrast gets amped up and you'll end up getting some really intense clear areas and edges and really deep dark color down below. So just to show this off, they do actually recommend in the documentation that you don't ever have pure saturation or pure value. You can see how it kind of pops right there. So you do want to have your value a little bit lower and your saturation can be pretty close if you want it to. The negative fog bias values really, you can see I've got this as pure black right now. We can just see what it looks like. So it's very interesting. You can see really subtle hints of blue down in here, but overall this thing is really just taken on a completely opaque blue glass. So if I go back over to this, so let's get in this shader here, and I'm just going to take this fog bias down to -1, and then we'll go ahead and relaunch that IPR so we can see that update. There we go. Cool. We can try this fog multiplier coming down a little bit. And there you go. You can really start seeing that effect. So we've got that really saturated dark blue, but yet we still have some blue overall. And so maybe if I bring this brighter, that will ease off on some of the intensity of that black value that we're getting. So now I'm starting to introduce some additional color down below here. And if I brought this fog bias up to 1, we can see what that does. So now I'm getting a very, very even spread of blue throughout the glass. So a very cool effect in the shader here. So, let's really crank this. We'll do a -2 and then maybe like a 0.05 on my fog multiplier. And I'll get a very, very contrasty effect. And I'll have areas where it goes almost clear. So you can see back here, it's almost clear. And then the edges where I'm really seeing through a lot of glass, it goes really dark black. So, if I even did like 0.01, my fog multiplier, and I can take that bias even lower and I'll get an even harsher amount in that curve. So you can see already I've got a lot of clear glass and then a lot of really deep dark blue. So you can think of this bias as kind of clamping the range in different directions. So when I go negative, it really starts raising the contrast, and when I go positive, it really starts lowering that contrast. So again, beautiful effect inside this V-Ray shader here. So that's actually going to wrap it up for the glass, and then we'll move on to something else next.